Croeso. This is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video, talking about some of the stuff I have read recently. We have 3 books today. Solar War by John French, Time of Contempt by, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce the name, Andrzej Sapkowski, I think, and Roman Coinage in Britain by P.J. Casey. So we'll quickly talk about Solar War. This was an audiobook. I like having a prop, so I'm going to wave a different book in the series around, by John French. And this is, we're coming to the end of the Horus Heresy. It's a 40k book, and it's the first steps, as it suggests, of the Solar War. So Horus and his fleet has finally reached the solar system. Their sights are set upon Terra, and everything is converging there. It was okay for what we're building up to. I really don't know. We had some very fun callbacks to those early brilliant books with the Lunar Wolves. I did like that. We had a lot of fun with Abaddon, who is a lot more reasonable in this, and we had a lot of fun with Ahriman. I'll talk about them in a sec, because I'll get it out of the way now. I don't like space battles. For someone who likes reading a bit of pulpy sci-fi, I like my battles to be happening on the planet, or in boarding actions. Talking about big ships shooting at other big ships, it doesn't really interest me. It doesn't hold my attention, so that was... I should have seen that coming, because I knew this is the beginning phases, but it still meant big chunks of this book weren't really for me. And that's no fault of John French, he's a good author, but that just wasn't for me. What was for me, in the absence of fun battle-y stuff, was 2 characters who I've always thought were kind of cool, being very cool. Because, I mean, if you don't know the Horus Heresy, just don't listen to this first book, wait till I pick up another one. But Horus has allied himself with chaos and the sorcery and gods and all of that. And it's brilliant, the attitude that Abaddon has to this, because Abaddon, the only reason he rebelled was loyalty to Horus and hatred of the Emperor, because he believes, not unreasonably, that it's the Astartes, the super soldiers, the Marines, they're the ones who've conquered the galaxy. Why are they having to answer to these normal humans that the Emperor is putting in charge of its administration? And I can understand that. And he's hugely loyal to the War Master. And I can understand that. But he hates chaos. And the irony that in the current setting, Abaddon is sort of the face of chaos as a faction is quite fun. But he just holds it in such contempt. And when the word-bearers, who are the religious fanatics for chaos, his interactions with them, it's just brilliant, because I hate the word-bearers, they're just simping, and they're, to use the modern term, and they're just awful. They have no charisma. Yes, First Heretic was a good book, but they have no draw. They're just there to grovel and to look for something to worship. And there's a priest assigned to Horus's fleet, and Abaddon just keeps slapping him down and ignoring all of this preaching he's doing and saying, please just give me an excuse to kill you. Really, I've said that I won't, but given enough provocation I can. Please, just provoke me enough. And I absolutely loved that. He has some great attitude. And I loved Ahriman having a similar sort of thing, but less overt, because Ahriman is involved with the warp. He is a sorcerer. He is somebody who works with these same powers as the word-bearers do. But Ahriman and the Thousand Sons are scholars. They've become sorcerers through study and through careful practice and learning. Whereas the word-bearers just sacrifice loads of people, juice themselves up with warp energy, and then fling it. Or they sell their souls to demons and let themselves be possessed. And it's fun Abaddon's contemptuous attitude, the word bearers can sort of justly say is based on ignorance. He doesn't understand the warp as well as he might, and so he hates it. It's not the whole story, but it does make sense. Ahriman is the opposite. He understands the warp better than all these priests. He is the one with all the forbidden arcane knowledge, and he views them with the same sort of contempt, except he's not seeing them as Abaddon does, as, you're worshipping all this nonsense, yeah, maybe it's handy, but whatever. Ahriman is this sort of disappointed professor looking at these GCSE students and thinking, stop pretending you know stuff. And I really liked that. In a book that had an awful lot of, come on, get on with it, those character moments were really good and were really worth it. So, yeah, if you're a Horus Heresy fan, you're going to end up reading these. The Solar War by John French is well worth it. That's that. My research book now, Roman Coinage in Britain by P.J. Casey. Now, I mentioned this earlier. I had hoped for something a bit different, because it is mostly about economics. Now, yes, it's a slim book. I had assumed there'd be a bit of that. But I would also have liked to have seen a bit more about why these coins as a form of art were created the way they were. Because of course you've got the emperor as heads, but you've got various different scenes or creatures or gods from myth as the tails. I would have liked to have seen a bit more insight into, well, why was this, and what inspired this coinage to be made in this way. And instead it's nearly all ancient world economics. And that is, to an extent, interesting, but it's not sort of fascinating bedtime reading. A couple of little things. There's looking at the coin-based evidence and seeing how Caligula's reign was almost being swept under the carpet of history, because later Romans were sort of bringing in his coinage again and trying to suppress knowledge of it. And there's things like showing coin hoards and thinking, this is evidence, this coin hoard is near a military area, clearly this new emperor was trying to buy off the military commanders. And that's sort of interesting. But the thing I really liked was, it is page 26, seeing Britain as a microcosm of the empire. Now, there are broad variations. Yeah. Britain, the very extremity of the Roman world, presents a microcosm of the whole. It deployed a large standing army and suffered attacks from across its provincial frontiers and maritime raiders, geographically divided into two zones, and the geographical divide of those two zones is very like the geographical divide of East and West Empire, which I just hadn't thought of before. And the way the currency pattern changes and the maintenance of an army and the demands on the rural population, I find, this sounds dull to most people, but I found that an interesting thing to look at from the coin-based evidence. I'm probably not making it as clear as I could be, but read the book if you're interested. I thought that made it worth reading. It wasn't what I'd hoped it would be, but it was worth a read. Now we come to the latest Witcher book that I have given a go at. Now, I've read The Last Wish. That was really fun. I read Blood of Elves, and I hated it. Because The Last Wish had what you want in a Witcher book. It was Geralt, he was out hunting various monsters. There was a little bit of dry humour in there. There was lots of little references to our own fairy tales. It was a fun read. And then Blood of Elves was just info dumping, with Geralt barely being in it, almost no action, lots of intrigue, but not particularly interesting intrigue, and that was it. So I wasn't a fan, and I was half and half about whether to try it again, but saw this in the library and thought I'll give it a crack, see what it's like. It's only about 330 pages long. I'll have a go. It's a lot better. The amount of waffle has been cut down quite a bit. The amount of info dumping, there's still quite a bit of it going on, but it's not nearly as bad. And we're following Ciri still, and instead of following her doing her Witcher training, we're now following her as she's being pushed towards sorceress training. We're having a little bit of Geralt and Yennefer's relationship. We're having a bit of the spy master situation that's going on. And like a lot of the others, it's clearly building to something rather than having a lot of climax in and of itself. But it's a marked improvement. It's enough to keep me interested. A little note I made, I don't know if I mentioned the page number. I just put 220-ish, that's handy. An interesting way of dealing with info dumps, which I rather liked. And we have, I'm sure it's supposed to be Dandelion, I just pronounce it as Dandelion. He's talking to Geralt about what happened while you were unconscious. And instead of a huge block of text, as we've had before, he has a bit of a block of text, here's what's happening, and then there's a short POV of somebody going through what he's just described. So he said, the frontiers are falling to Nilfgaard on such and such and such. And then there's a few pages POV of a soldier on that border, and you become invested in what's happening. And I can't remember what the other example was, but it's a really interesting way of dealing with it. It doesn't take that long. It's not dedicating a full chapter to this new point of view, but it means you have that little bit of emotional investment in the exposition, which you just didn't have in Blood of Elves. And I thought that's an interesting technique. I'd not seen that before done in this way. What it could really bloody do with is a map, because we have an awful lot of talk about different factions and an awful lot of talk of geography and who is going where and where this border is and that border and where this frontier is and this river that we need to reach. There's no map, and I don't know if it's just the edition that I have or whether a map was just never released with these, because I don't remember there being one in Blood of Elves. It would have been really handy to have one. That's all I'm saying. Another thing, and this is, I could put it as a flaw, but it's more an observation, and I had the sense to mark this one. A criticism I had of Blood of Elves, and which can be levelled at this, is Geralt, the Witcher, for whom this series is named, isn't in it that much. And when he is in it, he's not doing an awful lot. In this one, he's mostly being dragged around social events that he's not very comfortable with. That's not what I want from a Witcher book, funnily enough. But it's interesting that the character doesn't even view himself the way a protagonist should be viewed. Because I've often thought he's not a real protagonist. He has almost no page time, he has almost no agency. And part of that, at least, he addresses himself in quite a good way. Set out your chessboard, the kings, queens, elephants, and rooks, and don't worry about me, because I mean as much on your chessboard as the dust on it. It's not my game. You say I'll have to choose, I say you're wrong. I won't choose. I'll respond to events. I'll adapt to what others choose. That's what I've always done. Now, I don't know if he plans on changing this attitude, but that's a very honest way of saying this is a passive protagonist. This is someone with minimal agency. He occasionally makes a choice, but he has been pushed into it. He's not actively pushing the plot forward. Yennefer is doing that. Even Ciri is doing that. But Geralt, yes, it's a criticism in a way, but he is openly not seeking to affect the plot. He is allowing himself to be carried along with it. And it's interesting to see that that's not an accident, that's not poor writing, that's not the author losing control of the story. The author is deliberately saying, no, this is what my protagonist is doing. He is choosing to react to other people. I found that interesting, like the other technique. So yes, a vast improvement on Blood of Elves, I thought, and to the point where I'm going to try Baptism of Fire, largely because I know it's also in the library, but also this has piqued my interest again. It's not a deep, deep world to dive into the way Tolkien is, but it's a bit of fun, and if I can get myself a map and print it out, or see if it's in another version, then that'll be handy. But apart from that, surprisingly good. But not exceedingly good. And on that, I'm hungry now. On that note, I am going to leave it there. So, this is James, aka JP Harker. Will Vow.